Right before AI, I was totally fixated on like everybody should just get cash flow positive and people shouldn't burn money. I've completely inverted again. I don't think margins matter right now. I think delivering agents that work matter, and that's the only thing that matters, because you can just if you deliver an agent that works in 2 years from now, that agent will cost a tenth of what it does today to run.
Yeah.
So just like build agents that work.
Aaron, thank you so much for joining us for Greylock Change Agents.
Yeah.
This is a new series that we put together where we're talking with CEOs of agentic products to really understand what it means to be building software using agents.
I didn't actually pick up on the pun of the thing until now. I saw the email, and I was like, change agent, let's call him a change agent. But it's actually just really about the AI agents.
A lot of marketing minds went into that one.
All right.
Aaron, you have been the co-founder and CEO of Box for 20 years now.
Yes.
And public CEO for 10 years.
Yeah, it's been a ride.
I feel like this is a perfect year to get you
totally
on
perfect.
the show.
Yes.
And you've been extremely vocal online and in the product around applying agentic AI, not just into Box, but into the landscape as a whole. So I'm really excited to have you on for tonight.
Awesome.
We're going to dive deep into how people are using agents, how far they can go, and your theories of really what the future of SaaS looks like.
Facts, not theories.
Yes, the facts,
okay, thank
of course.
you.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
We're not predicting the future, we're inventing it right here. So maybe to start, tell us a little bit about how you've adopted agents at Box, both in the context of the product at Box and also how you've used them internally.
Yeah, so maybe I'll do the internal just super quickly because I think the product gives us a little bit more terrain. So internally, I think we kind of probably are adopting very similar to how you would expect any company that has, fortunately or unfortunately, years and years of processes that have been built up and people that have managing those processes, which means you can't sort of blow up everything in the way that you can as a brand new startup and kind of clean sheet of paper. So it's a lot of really both bottom up, hey, everybody adopt things like Cursor and the latest tools on that front. With some degree of kind of more targeted implementation of agents in a variety of workflows. So customer support, inbound, some things on the sales front, but probably the greatest usage and impact is on AI for coding, and then our own tools internally for a lot of our knowledge work use cases for what we built out. But we've been very clear we're going to go AI first as a company.
Yep.
And I think it's very non-novel if you're a brand new startup, because we're trying to actually look more like that. But novel if you're a really large enterprise and we can kind of move a little bit quicker than maybe some of the largest enterprise software companies out there.
Yep, that makes sense. And what have you seen? There's a lot. It was just on your website. There's a lot of different ways it seems like you've adopted agents in the product.
Yeah.
Today, what is the ceiling that you've seen for what agents can do for a company or a product like Box?
Yeah, so the reason that we're so excited, and as you can tell from the tweets, is that we have, I think we're like probably like 90th or 95th or 98th percentile of things that we've always wanted to do with our software versus things we couldn't do.
Yeah.
So if you just took look at the intersection of like software companies that have wanted to tap into some set of use cases, but the technology didn't allow that, we are like at the peak of the peak.
Yeah.
The reason for that is we deal with unstructured data, and unstructured data is so messy that it's very, very hard to automate things around unstructured data. So for years, we'll go to customers and we'll say, hey, you have all your contracts in Box. What if you could better understand them and orchestrate a contract workflow? Or hey, you have all your invoices in Box, and what if you could handle your invoices much more quickly? Or hey, you have all this data, you have all this research data for clinical drug trials that you're working on. What if you could understand it? And we've had all of this sort of promise that it unfortunately has been relatively unmet or under exploited based on just the fact that it's really hard to do those things in a pre-AI world. Mm-hmm. So people would implement maybe OCR technology or an RPA solution, or maybe they would just send data to a BPO provider and have it get processed. All of those solutions don't scale, way too expensive. You're kind of going use case by use case to actually go and bring automation to the work. And so it really rarely ever actually happens as sort of was promised or what the customer was hoping for. So what's kind of emerged is we manage lots of data, hundreds of billions of files, exabytes of information, but unfortunately most of that data goes underutilized relative to its potential. And in our space, about kind of 90% of corporate information is unstructured.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of that looks like contracts and marketing assets and research files and invoices and marketing campaigns. And so we have long imagined this world. What if you could tap into all of that? And up until the past couple of years, that was not possible. So the reason we're so excited is now we see a future where you can actually begin to bring agents to all of that data and answer any kind of question the customer has, and then eventually be able to automate any kind of workflow that the customer has. And when you think about most work, it's mostly around unstructured data. And so that means that you could bring automation to most work in the future as a result of these technologies. And so we want to just be the best place to manage the information, bring the agents to the data, and then federate to any of the applications that customers work in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I'm going to structure the rest of the questions in two big buckets,
Okay.
right? Bucket number one is, how are agents going to be differentiated, and how do you build this differentiated experience with agentic AI? And then the second big bucket of questions is going to be, what do enterprise business model look like over time, right?
Sure.
So starting with differentiated agents, actually, maybe to start open-ended, what makes an agent, great? So how do you envision a delightful experience for a customer adopting one of your agents?
That in and of itself is about a 4-hour podcast. So, there's probably a few different things that could break out into, let's say at a minimum, there's two big categories, which is the scenarios where the customer doesn't even want to even worry about if it's an agent or not.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of these use cases, which is the user interface doesn't change at all.
Okay.
It's just an agent behind the scenes is doing something, updating a field, moving something along a workflow, and this is interesting, sort of the UX actually hasn't changed much, but the agent is bringing the work that the person used to do into that. And then the area where there's a bigger change is now I'm actually an end user, I'm interacting with an agent, and I'm sending it off a task, and it's got to go off and do a bunch of work in the system. It's got to use various tools within Box. It has the ability to search for data. It has the ability to upload files and download them and read them. And that's probably the bigger service area of change that we're working on.
Yeah.
And that has a lot of interesting properties of what is the future of human-computer interaction, human-agent interaction.
Exactly.
Where we spend a lot of time just figuring out how do we get that right? How do we nail that experience of, I'm a person and I go in and I want an RFP filled out from, this existing set of RFP data, and then this customer's, very unique bespoke RFP that's coming in. How do I hand that task off to an agent? How do I see the work that it's doing as it's happening? And then how do I land at a point where I can go review it and then double check its work and sort of ensure that full process is orchestrated well. So we're spending a lot of our time on that problem of how do we deliver that in a delightful way, in a way that provides a lot of transparency to the user, but not too much that you get kind of confused about all of the innards of the system. You kind of everybody uses at least listening or here uses let's say Claude. And you can see the work that Claude's doing and all the code that it's writing for its task and the MCP calls it's making and the MCP tool names are very janky because they're named by engineers and most people would be kind of actually scared if they saw all of the things that the agent was doing.
Yeah.
So finding this right balance of how do you show the user what work is happening without maybe showing too much. That sort of we're kind of showing the inside of the computer a bit too much. So we're spending a lot of time on that. And then the big axes that we're focused on is how much data can an agent work through? How long can the tasks be? What's the accuracy of what the agent can operate on? Again, how does the human what's the human in the loop element to that? So that's where we're spending our time.
Yeah, because obviously, one thing that you've said time and time again is, we've been building software for humans, and now we're really building software. You can imagine a world where we're building software for agents, right? And so there's obviously the UX component of it, and then there's also how's the buyer decisioning on which piece of software to buy between one and the other if at the end of the day it's abstracted away from them.
I'm very convinced that users are still going to want to see a lot
Okay.
And so that, as long as the user wants to see a lot and touch buttons and move things around, then I think you have a very strong case for sort of dedicated, let's just call it SaaS, plays per category of software. You have to both build software that is super powerful for the user to manage the agents, and then you have to build software that makes the agents really effective. And I think if you're starting from scratch, it's a lot easier to do that. You have one downside, which is you don't have a lot of existing data.
Yeah.
If you are, starting with some kind of position in the market, you have a lot of existing data, but you can't kind of blow up the whole interface and sort of start from scratch because you have to bring your users along for this. So it's actually great because we have this even playing field between startups and incumbents because each advantage becomes a disadvantage on the other side. And so we'll just have to see how these markets play out.
Yeah, and then one thing you keep on saying is the data advantage is a big advantage.
Yeah.
And I think you said once like 95% of enterprise data really just isn't getting used in a valuable way. And
it's probably actually, the number's probably far larger.
Yeah. But at the same time, one other thing you've talked about is context rot.
Yes.
Right. And so how do we give these agents the right amount of context to actually make them valuable?
Yeah.
And I think this goes into, how much do we train the end user to decide, what to tell the agent and how much information to give it.
Yeah.
So how would you think about that in your product at Box?
We think about it a lot, but this is actually, maybe if you just bookmark this, and you could probably you could probably have if you had a conversation in Silicon Valley and you could actually find a way to decipher or split out, here are the things that we're talking about in Silicon Valley that basically we can productize and make the rest of the world understand. And then there's a category of things where we're going to talk about in Silicon Valley that 0% of the rest of the world will ever understand. and this is one of those.
Yeah.
I've talked to engineers that you can, they almost talk as if they have this sort of, kind of deep understanding at any given moment where the context window is going to fail them. And they change their prompting.
Yeah.
They decide, okay, this is the moment where I need some kind of compaction step to happen. They can kind of feel their way through the conversation and looking at the tokens used or whatever. Like literally no knowledge worker in the world will ever do that outside of an engineer in Silicon Valley. Yeah. So so for that kind of category, we don't know how to build software to make that easy. I have no idea how you could build software that helps a person understand hey, your conversation with this agent's going on, quite a while. It's probably going to start to screw up.
Yeah.
That would totally freak everybody out.
Do you think you'll need to be able to do that, or do you think just
we just need the labs to fix this problem?
Yeah,
so
the model AI labs.
I don't know why we don't have. Where's Mercor? What are we doing, guys? We need more data. So I think we have to. The models have to be able to handle larger context windows. You still see these extreme jumps and failures after 50 to 100K tokens. No matter, the idea that, okay, a model can do 2 million tokens is kind of worthless if it starts to drop off at 100K. This one exceeds my product understanding because it's such a, the amount of understanding you'd have to as a user of what's going on behind the scenes is so crazy. And then not to mention you have other problems, which is well, the tool use actually took up a lot of the tokens, but the user doesn't have any conception that why would that, how's that working against my allocation, in this conversation. This is why I think the tasks still are going to remain relatively discrete inside of knowledge work for a while. This is why you have to have some degree of human in the loop to provide some oversight in this. It's actually why I'm very bullish on the need for applied solutions. Because in the enterprise, because again, I think if you don't have the way of on a per use case basis understanding these things and helping the user understand them, I think it's just very hard for, again, we can't take every single thing that we see in Cursor or Claude Code and then just port it over to regular knowledge work, because the understanding that the users of those systems have on the innards of it won't actually translate to the lawyer or the marketer or the invoice processing person in the real world.
Yeah, I think you've talked about this a lot, where there's just so much context within each function or vertical of how they operate that, it's not Claude for X is going to build it all. You actually have a lot that you need to build on top of the model layer.
Yeah, there's a lot to build, and we can certainly get into that. But in general, back to the kind of core, context rock point, I mean, a lot of what we spend time on is effectively how do you get the intersection of the most amount of context for the model without it being too much.
Yeah.
And the most accurate context for the model without it being too much. And the kind of fun problems that we deal with that are, on one hand, I wish we didn't have. On the other hand, it makes it fun. Are things like in our environment, just think about your workflows with content or documents. Let's say pre-AI, maybe you've cleaned things up because the AI problem, but like, let's say you were working on a due diligence deal for a company. Yeah. And just think about how, and you just said, hey, arbitrarily, I want lots of data about this company. I want contracts, and I want invoices, and I want financial documents. And the users that are supplying those, there's just like lots of different versions, and there's version 1 through 73 of all the edits, and like what is the pristine copy? What's the authoritative source of truth for that information? Now you multiply that across a large enterprise of, let's say, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of employees. Just think about how messy everybody's data is. Agents, are going into those environments right now, and the user's just saying, hey, show me the latest contract with this client. And it's like, well, actually, there's like 43 conflicting things that look like maybe they're the latest, contract for that client. And a person can know to ask the user the question or the colleague the question and say, hey, I couldn't find it. Where do you think it is? A human would know, okay, our kind of internal semantics or kind of vocabulary for this topic is like this. Or I know that we always do underscore V1 or whatever when it's the draft version. Yet the one that doesn't have the underscore is actually the thing that is sort of the copy that is final. Agent doesn't know any of this stuff. Yeah. And it has none of that context. And so in most real live environments, there's going to be a huge amount of gap between getting the workflow that we all imagine to be able to bring automation and where it is today. And all of that gap is basically it's all approximates a context problem. Yeah. And so how do you make sure the agent knows how to find the right document? How does the agent, decide? We have even small things like what is the difference between asking a document, working through a document to find a set of facts versus using a document as knowledge to answer a question about another document that it needs to review. All of these problems are just super messy, and so this is where we spend all of our time.
And so how do you bring the customer along with you? You work with some of the largest customers in the US and in the world. Yeah. Obviously, there's this non-determinism to the AI right now. Yeah. So how do you tell them, hey, I promise you X, and I don't really know on why?
This is the long slog of selling software. And so we're kind of used to this. The non-deterministic version is different. It's harder in some ways and not easier in really any way other than there is just general market kind of demand and pull, which is exciting because there's something that the customers deeply are passionate about. I'm a very big believer that of like evals are not going away, and that's like a very good market right now because I think customers are going to need evals on every important dimension of their business process that they want to go and automate. And I think when we always sort of talk about like, oh, there's like a vibe check and all that kind of stuff in Silicon Valley. Like people aren't going to do vibe checks for their invoice processing system. They're just going to want an eval that says it's delivering 99.9% accuracy or 99.3% accuracy. And we know how to kick it off to a user to review it when that's not happening. So we spend a lot of time with customers on that. One interesting, this is such a micro thing, but it's kind of funny. So we'll work with customers where they give us ground truth data. So we have a document processing system where we can extract intelligence from documents and then put that into a database. And there's a lot of customers that don't even have ground truth data for that process. And so they come to us and they want us to work on that. And so it's actually this really random kind of aside, which is we now are we haven't done this at any real scale yet, but it's kind of funny. There might be a future job of just a ground truth labeler of enterprise data within a company, either within a company or even outsourced. And so at the same time, we think that we're removing jobs from one part of the person literally doing the human labeling. There'll just be another set of jobs of labeling the ground truth data
within the company
to then go and drive the automation. So. But this has been, you have to do the ground truth data. We have to do the evals. You have to get into the workflow. probably, so you have to do all that. And then I think probably the biggest impediment most large enterprises have is simply the fact that you have to change your workflow so dramatically if you want to get if you want to get significant outcomes from AI. And that's the part that will take the longest for enterprises to realize, which is just if you don't re-engineer your process for agents, then you're capped at 20% productivity gain or something. Well, I'm making up a number, but you're not going to get 20x productivity gain if you don't re-engineer the process.
Yeah, because if we, to some degree, if you create an agent to reflect human work, you are going to supercharge that human, but you're never going to create a process that could be even better than what the human process was in the first place.
That and even if you tried to replicate what the human is doing, the human comes with so much extra context that the agent doesn't by default.
Yeah.
And so most of our code bases weren't written to teach an agent that knows nothing about our code base how to code, because the engineer showed up and they got to go, they can just Slack their colleague or they can just literally sit next to a person and bug them.
Yeah.
The agent doesn't have that context. The agent doesn't have the context on what are all of the guidelines of a contract that is is good or bad in this particular organization. That wasn't ever written down for a person because that was just tribal knowledge that was developed. So if you're going to go and actually deploy agents, you have to re-engineer your process, at least in the sense that you have to construct it for a world of, imagine a super intelligent person showed up, but they know zero about your business and they forget everything 10 minutes later. And so how would your process actually work if a person showed up at their desk every day, forgot everything from the prior day?
Yeah.
What would your process look like? Most people have not had to design their workflows for that world.
Yes, I want to talk about what you think that looks like.
Yeah.
But before we go into that, so if you think about, I'm the agent builder, right? Either I'm a new company using agents from scratch, or I'm Box and I'm using agents on top of an existing base of documents. What do you think ends up being the moat, right? Is that the orchestration layer that you're talking about, the context, the underlying data? I mean, you've done 20 years of kind of pitching Box.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the technological moat has changed over the years.
Yes.
But what do you think that looks like for an agentic company?
I think it looks very similar with the added, whatever the added, kind of agentic capability is. But I think the history of enterprise software going back, 40 plus years to early days of Oracle, and then we had the client, client server era and Siebel and Salesforce and SaaS and so on. It's basically data, workflows, users, a network effect of applications built on that. And that you win or lose, you win or die based on that in an enterprise. Am I powering a mission critical process? Or is my system getting more and more data over time that makes the next run of that process better and more effective for the customer? And oh, by the way, that will correlate with stickiness and retention because the customer doesn't want to change a system that has all their data and is working well. Yeah. Even if you could save 10 or 20%, it just wouldn't be worth the kind of price to do that. So everything in AI will have all those same qualities. Plus, there's some probably new interesting moats directly in agents, which is, is that agent better over time at understanding my workflow? Is there a set of memories that it has? Is there a set of markdown files that it generated with a bunch of interesting lessons that it learned that are proprietary to my agent design? There will be a bunch of stuff that over time you can kind of build that will probably just get stickier and stickier because effectively, this is maybe a stretch of the analogy, but you're kind of like the labor manager for that person's workflow. Yeah. And so why would the company want to go change their labor if it's working well for them? You don't change out your employees every single day if the workflows are going well. So the moat is I have a set of agents that deeply understand my process. Those agents are obviously now aligned to a vendor I use. Yeah. And right now, there's no obvious way. Nobody's figured out how you do agent portability in any meaningful way, and that might even be possible, given the data and workflows involved. And so effectively, if I'm providing you with the actual work that's being done, and I'm the labor provider as that vendor, if I'm doing my job and delivering the best version of that labor and what it's executing on, then I should have a continued ongoing relationship with you. So the moat is, effectively customer success on that workflow. Then it behooves the vendor to you always have to be the best at that.
Yeah.
And there's no because the converse is equally true. If I had somebody providing me labor and that labor was 20% worse every data that comes in than what I hear my peer company, my peer is getting, then I'm just gonna switch because that's worth them to switch.
Yeah.
It's not worth 20% cheaper, but it's worth 20% better. And so you do have to make sure that you're always building them the best agents, which is, I think this will be a market won by the best products.
Yeah.
Like unquestionably. There's no way that you'll survive as, okay, it's a mediocre system. There was ways to survive as a mediocre system in software because the people were doing the work in the software, and you could just throw another webinar at your employees if the software sucked. If you had bad software, just go to the training.
As long as the people were being enabled to use the software well and liked it and were used to it.
The amount of, if you went to, just making up an example, if you went to Coca-Cola and Pepsi and you gave one the world's worst CRM system and one the world's best CRM system, but the same talent profile at Coke and Pepsi, I don't know that the revenue would be in a massively compounding way that different, right? Yeah. If you gave them the world's best ERP system and the third best ERP system, I don't think that the supply chain is going to be so totally different. But if you give a team right now the state of the art in coding from a company that didn't upgrade their software from, let's say, a year ago, let's say whatever GitHub Copilot was a state of the art a year ago, and you gave, like for like people, let's say Cursor or Claude Code, just to pick a couple examples, versus GitHub Copilot from a year ago, just let's say the stuck-in-time version, because that's what a lot of companies are still running on, because they have typical IT processes that don't update things. You're going to see 2 to 3x difference in productivity gains. We've never been in a period of software where making a decision like that leads to completely different productivity levels. Yeah. And so the moat is, are you building the solution that delivers those compounding advantages to a customer? And that, I think, is a sustainable moat if you're kind of ahead of the competition.
Yeah, and how much, one thing that you didn't say is that, to have a moat in this era, you have to have a deep or proprietary knowledge of the model layer. Yeah. And I think you said this a lot before, speaking with regards to new founders, don't get lost in spending too much time in fine-tuning and spending too much time even pre-training your own model. Work with whatever the labs are giving you and work on top of that. So what are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I think that one is I think is hopefully relatively consensus at this point. You obviously have cases where Cursor gets big enough and then they decide to have Composer as a model, which totally makes sense, because at some point if you have enough data where you can begin to fine-tune or train your own model, and there's sort of a purpose-built use case, or you have cost, arbitrage you need, then that all makes sense. But I think getting started, I think just basically should be building on top of the existing models. And then I think the classic fear is, well, what if the models just, the models are just going to keep moving up and up the stack and solve more and more use cases over time, and that will be a competitive threat. But that's really where I just fundamentally believe it's a misunderstanding of how wide that gulf is between what the model can do and what the workflow of the future is going to need, and what that customer is going to need to actually go and change their workflow. And that is, that gulf is not any smaller today than it was 2.5 years ago. Yeah. The models are better, so you have a better chance of actually doing it, but all the software that has to be built to make the model useful for the workflow, maybe asterisks, depending on the workflow, is still massive. And that's where I think the startup opportunity is right now.
And that's where most people should spend their time.
Yeah, just build the best bridge between those worlds. And if you spend even any energy on the model, then you really are screwed, because the model will just get better and then basically make all the work you just did, relatively useless. Yeah. There's a lot, in your business, it's much, I think, probably harder to figure out how to navigate. But 3 years ago or 5 years ago, let's say right before AI, I was totally fixated on everybody should just get cash flow positive and people shouldn't burn money. I've completely inverted again. I don't think margins matter right now. I think delivering agents that work matter. Yeah. And that's the only thing that matters, because you can just, if you deliver an agent that works, in 2 years from now, that agent will cost a tenth of what it does today to run. Yeah. So just build agents that work.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so let's use that and let's take that to the second topic, which is, how does the enterprise change with agents? And so I want to talk about both like the business model, but also like you said, at an organizational level. If you envision a world where agents get used deeply in an enterprise, you can imagine the way this labor workforce is structured might be very different.
Yeah.
So I want to start and talk about like what you've seen so far. So obviously you can have an enterprise adopt Box agents. And I'm sure they're being sold other agentic products on top of their other systems of record.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what's the most advanced example that you can give us of an enterprise really adopting Box and also multiple other agents? Are they making any of their own? Give us a starting example.
So I'll give you a fun one. I'll have to kind of anonymize it.
Sure.
It's not public at the moment, but there's a large kind of healthcare process, the kind of insurance claims billing processing company, and they process just an ungodly amount of these claims that come through, and they have a system where they have to go with people, read every single kind of medical billing claim that comes in and process it and figure out, basically triage the data and figure out who gets claimed what and how much and what's the billing code and who does it need to route to and all of that process.
Yeah.
And that basically is effectively a major point of friction in their workflow, where obviously higher throughput, more accurate throughput equals more revenue for them. And these are the kind of use cases where all of a sudden, if you imagine a world where agent labor is sort of infinite and just extremely low cost, not free, not the kind of Sam's view of too cheap to meter. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
But basically super cheap and unlimited. What could you do if you just went and automated that process?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of these are forward-thinking customers that are at the bleeding edge of what's possible. They're starting to look at their business through the lens of, where are my pockets of large amounts of data that if I had either better insights into what was in that information, I could deliver better for my customers. Yeah. Or if I could have a faster throughput, I could generate more revenue or automate more work. Or if I could analyze more data, I would be able to deliver a better, more strategic product for my customers. And we have examples in all, basically in each of those categories. But they all basically are this idea of lots of unstructured data that agents go and review and automate. And I think the other winning examples right now, coding, frontline customer support. There's a bunch of categories around kind of the developer workflow starting to emerge that are pretty exciting. There's every vertical has their own set of plays. But so we're on the very early stages of seeing what the future of work might look like as you imagine kind of large enterprises. Right now, I think the biggest lesson though is actually from the smallest startups. Okay. That's who I spend more of my time learning from to figure out how they're running. And then I just try and kind of translate that back to big companies. Yeah. To the extent that they can understand it, but like they would, but it's going to be many, many years, probably a decade, before you could see, a JP Morgan or something like that operate in the way that we are all starting to see in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. And I can imagine there's going to be certain functions that are maybe more standalone or just obviously applied to AI. So maybe let's say customer support as an example, where you can take AI, you can take voice agents, and you can apply it very well in an absolute function. And then there's going to be more complex examples, like you just said, where I'm, processing insurance claims, touching so many different parts and so many different systems of record that, I'm not going to totally change that organization from a workforce perspective. Maybe I'll use these agents to supercharge them, but it's going to take longer for me to actually organizationally change.
Yeah, and I think what's going to happen is, this is why I'm generally optimistic, and I haven't seen massive counter evidence to this. I'm generally optimistic on the future of jobs. Partly because the actual transformation will take longer than people realize. Yeah. So you actually have way more of it'll be more of a glide path to this end state. That then gives people the chance to retrain and repurpose and move things around. And also because I actually think like a good half of the AI use cases I've talked to enterprises about have nothing to do with removing labor. They have everything to do with bringing abundant labor to a problem that they could not afford to bring labor to before. And we are like totally missing that. So my current, sort of way of thinking about that is just like, go out 5 years from now, let's just say, and think about how many tokens in the economy we're using and what percentage of the work of those tokens did we do today.
Yeah.
And versus in 5 years from now. And I think it's going to be on the order of 90 to 95% of tokens in, let's say, 5 years from now will be on things that we don't do today. So that gap, that 20x increase in tokens from today's work is basically all the new work that happens. And what is that? That is a financial auditor. Right now, they take little samples of your contracts, and they take they sample your emails and your contracts that you're doing and the deals that you have coming through, and they just try and look at trends. Like, are there any kind of financial risks based on the sampling of data that I've seen? Well, what about a world when you could just audit everything?
Yeah.
And you just review everything. Either do you figure out the fraud faster? Do you detect risks in the business that you can now go and jump on? Totally new use cases. Not a single job changed in that process because all of a sudden we're using the AI to go do things that the humans didn't do. So these are the kind of things that we don't really, it's very, very hard to kind of pre-predict when you're at the start of the tech curve, but I'm like 1,000% confident we will be seeing way more of those than the ones where, there was a discrete sort of job, category that was lost in that process. And I just think we're at the beginning of where the growth, type of opportunities.
Yeah, it's like what happens when you have this abundance mindset, right? You have all these documents in Box that you've seen for 20 years not get utilized probably within your customers, and there's so much that they go do on top of it.
Yes, and I've anecdotally talked to a bunch of customers on like, hey, what are you doing with AI coding? And like, I don't know, half the time it's usually something like we're using it to refactor a code base.
Yeah.
We're using it to upgrade a system that we weren't touching. We're using it for complex data, ETL movement and analysis. And it's a bunch of things that they would not have been able, it was lower on the priority list than what they could have put people on. Yeah. And so all of a sudden, when you take something that is scarce and you make it abundant, it just turns out that you realize, oh, wait a second, like we've not been doing most of the things in our business that would be interesting and possible and maybe value creating, because the cost of hiring a person to do that on like day one, the fixed cost is that person's salary. And so how many new tasks do you have in an enterprise where it's like instantly, the second you think about it, it's worth 100K or 200K or 300K or whatever, depending on the role. Yeah. It's like hard to like justify bringing on a person for just a little tiny task.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can apply an AI agent to that. And it turns out that that's actually useful to have the agent go do that task. And so then I just go and elastically increase that.
Yeah.
And then what will happen is that we'll start to add new jobs, because the company will start to do things with their data or their workflow they didn't do before. And that will create a new bottleneck in the organization. So we have a small example that we haven't yet done the spending more money, but I know for a fact it'll happen. We had a sales rep build a full custom demo environment of a client we were pitching. And they built this full custom app for the customer and then embedded Box into it. And they probably spent 3 times more, I'm making up a number, 3 times, 5 times more time prepping for that customer meeting than they would have before, because they would not have custom coded an entire environment pre-AI. So in this counterintuitive way, the human is spending more time on that process because of AI, not less time. But the output of that process is now 10x the capability of what we would have done before. So what am I going to do in a budget planning cycle when our head of sales engineering says I want to hire more sales engineers to do that? I'm going to say, go for it.
Yeah.
Like that is going to be a way better customer experience than what we were doing.
Yeah, it's a win-win. You're getting a win from the customer experience side of things.
Everybody's winning. And then guess what? In 5 years from now, when you're an enterprise and somebody's pitching you on their product and they don't do that, you're just going to be like, I don't understand. Like, this is like, you might as well have sent me like a TXT file of your pitch. Like that's what it would be.
That's what it's going to feel
10 years ago, if somebody was not showing you a PowerPoint demo with a real, and they were just like, here's an email of our pitch. Like, that's what it will feel like. You're telling me you don't have an interactive environment of my website to play with this?
Yeah.
Like, how does that make any sense? So what will happen is our expectations in the economy will just go up of how everything should work. Yeah. And we will basically like not even remember how things used to work.
Yeah.
Like we'll totally forget about this. Like I was thinking this totally random non-AI point, but you'll get the kind of metaphor. This is like so bizarre. I remember 15 years ago, like 10 years ago even, right before pre-COVID, maybe a year or two before, we used to send dial-in numbers to a customer if they wanted to do a call. And we would ask them, do you want to do a video or is a dial-in fine?
Yeah.
And we would quite literally just have a voice call with a customer. I would just say, hey, yeah, so what we do is we help store your files, and they would say something, and nobody knows what's going on in the call. And like, I can't fathom the idea of just talking on a cell phone to a customer now
and
selling them something. Like like my brain cannot fathom that as a sales pitch.
Yes.
It's like I'm not wired to even understand that. And yet I did that 5 times a week 10 years ago. So how did we as an economy move to this world where that would be wild, unacceptable, you would lose every deal, and we just totally forget?
Yeah.
And so AI will just do the same thing. You'll just be like, yeah, I expect a custom environment of the product you're pitching me. That is just what vendors do now.
Yeah, enterprise like customization at scale is going to be.
Yeah, but for all the topics, for just everything, you will expect that.
Yeah, that makes it's not normal today, but it's definitely what you can see on the horizon. And so, one thing that you've said is, so it seems obvious that if I'm a system of record, which Box is, right? You have all this data, that's an advantage to you. Over time, as you think about the Box business model, or even abstracted away into any system of record business model, where does the value in that business model accrue to over time? Like, do you think it ends up accruing more to this kind of system of agentic intelligence and less to the system of record, or how do you think about that?
Depends on if you're allowing the system of record to also be the system of agentic intelligence in your framing. So if that's your framing, then 100%. If you imagine those
change the framing too.
Well,
please.
But if you imagine those as decoupled, then I would probably parse that a little bit, because I think systems of record were built for. It's kind of the same point I've been making, but systems of record were built for a TAM of human employees.
Yeah.
And that was sort of where the value kind of maxed out at. And now I at least imagine, I think anybody doing AI agents imagines that maybe we'll have like 100 times more agents than people, or 1,000 times more agents than people. So I think on a relative basis, the agent layer will sees growth from 0 to 1 trillion, let's say.
Yeah.
But the system of record layer now has 1,000 times more users on it that need to access data, need to execute a workflow, and need to move things through various events. And importantly, you need as an enterprise to care about data integrity and security and the controls in your workflow and traffic copying the agents. So basically, this is where I am very diametrically opposed to the view that the system of record kind of gets is kind of squeezed into a database interaction layer, because you actually need all of the core system of record properties for the agents to operate on. I think it's basically a situation where both win. And then more of it, maybe the germane question on then what happens is, how many of the systems of record become the system of intelligence or agents for their use case?
Yeah.
Versus how many startup opportunities are there to go disrupt an existing system of record, peel off those users, peel off the data, peel off the workflows. And then a third category of how many times is there just not even an incumbent, and you just have a net new startup that is going after a space that doesn't have a software incumbent, and it's just total greenfield.
Yeah.
And I think there's actually going to be a lot of those spaces. And so, I would bet basically on most startup revenue by mass, emerging in the third category of brand new spaces that software can be applied to for the first time ever. So I think most startup revenue will come from there. And then I think you'll have a kind of a handful of categories in the middle section, which is a startup disrupts the incumbent because the incumbent didn't build their agent layer fast enough or good enough, or they were kind of stuck in some myopic part of the market or view on the market.
Yeah, and then right now we live in a open ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right, where new agentic companies can pull information from different systems of record. Like, do you think that's going to remain open, or how do you think that evolves?
I think it'll remain open, but I do think that there's a question on the future of the business model of that. And
say more.
Well, just for practical reasons, I'll just take the most extreme analogy. Let's say you had 10 petabytes of data from an enterprise, and that enterprise and another vendor said, I have an agent that wants to read that data every single minute, all day long.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, okay, this is going to be really expensive for us to be able to do.
Yeah.
And your agent is processing everything in real time every single second. So maybe you need a business model that says, okay, there's an agent kind of API fee of it's a penny per data interaction or something. So I think there's a lot of interesting business model evolution that will have to happen in a world where you imagine 1,000 times more usage of agents than people. The seat model has been very kind of clear to everybody. You pay per user on the platform, and so I don't think it makes sense. You can't really perfectly analogize the seat to the agent model because you could kind of like shard an agent in any kind of arbitrary way, so you can't really treat them exactly as a user seat. But there's probably some amount of data access that the agent needs that you have to find some way of a fair trade between the data provider and then the agent provider.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then it's also not just between obviously the customer has the data, but then there's also interface with like other companies' agents.
Well. But I do think that the general concept of we are going to move to an enterprise model that has multi-agent systems, accessing the same data sets, coordinating with each other, overlapping each other, doing lots of interesting kind of ways of triaging a workflow, but I don't lose any sleep wondering will the business models of software be able to make that work. It'll be so easy.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah, it'll be easy. It's gonna happen. It's the customer's data
there.
And the market will just figure it out. You will not be able to kind of close your agents off from other systems, and you will not be able to close your data off from other agents.
As much as some people would like to try.
I don't know who you're referencing, but I'm not won't go down that lane.
I'm going to open it. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it for one or two questions from the group. So start thinking if you have some questions. My last question, purposefully challenging, is let's say you were to restart Box today.
Yeah.
How would you architect it differently, like knowing the agentic capabilities that are on the horizon?
Well, I'll just answer very literally on architect, and then maybe the bigger thing is like organizationally or whatever.
Yes.
But architecture. So we made a bunch of decisions over the past 2 decades of building the platform that have maybe they look coincidental, but they were planned for sort of long-term future-proofness. But basically, we made a bunch of architecture decisions that positions very well for agents. One thing that we were religious on early on was we and over the years there's always different variants, but the biggest thing we were religious on was we would never have 2 versions of Box. We would never have an on-prem version and a cloud version. We would never let the customer manage different versions. So there's no okay, there's 10 different versions the customer can be on. Which version are they on? We basically always avoided any feature that could ever emerge that would cause us to have 2 places where you might store data.
Okay.
Which is a really important property because it means that there's one canonical source of the authoritative copy of data in Box for everything. Yeah. There's only one way to store a document in Box, no matter what your use case is, no matter where you're coming from, no matter how you're using it. It all goes back to the same file system. Yeah. And so we were really religious on the kind of core primitives of the file system that we built. And that matters a lot because now we have an agent layer that gets to ride on having a fairly clean set of designs where it kind of knows how to interact with the file system. It doesn't have to worry like, is maybe the file in this other repository over here with a different version, and every time that you do a new AI update, you don't know which version of the system it works with. So architecturally, I think we're pretty happy. So there's not much in the pure tech I would redo or build that differently. But we were just very, very insistent on that from the beginning of the company. And then organizationally, I think if you could kind of wake up, have the same software but do clean sheet of paper operationally, I think you would do what all the startups are doing of we are going to the frontline IC engineer really has to have this mental model of you're a manager of agents. Your job is to, deploy tasks to an agent to go off and code something and then go review it. We're still going through that journey. Yeah. Partly because, again, there's a lot of tribal knowledge in the mind of an existing engineer and the existing code base, so you can't just hand off everything to an agent. And then there's an evolution of our own work kind of practices that have to happen. But I know there's fun debates on the topic. I would be the 996 we did 997 when we were. I mean, we didn't. If you're 99, do you end at 9 p.m.?
Yeah, that's supposedly.
That's like really early for when we were starting. So like we would be cranking in that way. And so if I could, have that kind of structure, but all of today's software, that'd be a nice kind of hybrid.
Well, the new founders are lucky that they don't have you as a competitor, starting 997 today.
I mean, but I've watched all the startups but we're not 997 today, right? We're now a company that has processes and all the things, and sometimes I'm like, fuck, like maybe we got to just do, I just got to be crazy and do like the largest 996 experiment in human history, and then just piss everybody off. So
I would love to see that happen. Questions from the audience. Okay, we have one over here.
I was just curious if you're seeing a change in the business model for Box from that per seat to some kind of usage, and added to that, you kind of mentioned that in the agentic, when the agentic flows, your moat might be the agents that you deploy on behalf of your customers. How they're self-learning. They might be custom made. So do you think like Box will end up becoming a managed solutions company versus a product company, more like Palantir, where you have forward deployed engineers? Once you get lock-in, because you customize it for that customer or customers, then you kind of, then they're yours and the switching cost gets high. So the business kind of changes from products to more like a managed solutions.
Yeah. This is, we could have actually, had a whole vignette on just that, because that's a really interesting topic that I don't know the end state of actually. So maybe the first thing that's easy is we do seats for the users and then consumption for the agents. And so it's kind of a usage-based model for agents. We have a thing called AI units that lets you kind of normalize the different use cases across one kind of currency. And then for the future of the overall business model, the thing that is the thing that I'm increasingly sympathetic to is if you're software now, this is kind of somewhat of an uncomfortable, anxious thing for us, but we are increasingly going to be selling outcomes to a customer, and we've never done that before in software. And we sell tools that other people use to deliver outcomes. Now we're going to be selling outcomes. And so when you're a customer, you kind of want a company to deliver the outcome if you are dependent on them for the outcome. And so that's going to change a bunch of the dynamics, which is, do you have a group of people that really know my business? They can come in and help implement the thing and then watch it. And when there's an SLA, like the new SLA might not just be downtime. It's going to be, oh, your accuracy dipped. Holy crap. Like, this is how do you do that at scale, right? Let's say you have 500 customers that are all hounding you on the efficacy of an agent in their mission critical workflow. So this is a totally new terrain for companies. This is actually why, again, this is where we get it wrong in Silicon Valley. This is where you could weirdly be bullish on the system integrators again. Because software companies aren't going to want to go build that out in the same way. So if you're Deloitte and you can come in and say, hey, I'm going to guarantee you, a certain accuracy level, and I'll swap out the vendors that we use at any given time for whatever the workflow is, like that's kind of what the customer is eventually going to want. Or this will take a lot longer. Or the new role of the IT organization are sort of like these AI eval, kind of management teams. Which is another, a whole new vector of
job.
Yeah, it's a new job, and it's a whole new way to think about your relationship with the enterprise. But like this, I'd say highly hazy area, no idea. We are doing this in incremental ways. We have a consulting division, and that's somewhat verticalized as appropriate, but it's nowhere near the level of we could go to your bank and say, let us just handle your credit lending operation. Like clearly, we're not going to do that. And we would much rather have Deloitte do that, and then we are providing the software for them, which is, again, why I think you're going to still see so many new, so like the labor will be alive and well handling a lot of those things.
But you can imagine a world where, let's say I build some other application that interfaces with the Box agent. right, for some answer, right? And you need to also, provide accuracy on that
Yes.
agent, right? So it
100%.
cascades onto the,
Yes.
a lot of different use cases.
Yep.
Maybe one last question right there.
I guess we talked a little bit about it, but I think one premise, or I think something that I heard is enterprises will always want to go for the best solution. And there's an aspect of it of being able to be in control of the data and being able of really being able to take it with you. And at the same time, you have a lot of vertical AI companies that have I would say a lock-in play in some way, or really trying to deeply understand your processes and get all that metadata intelligence that maybe sits with labor, but today sits with them. How do you feel that's going to be an interesting play, or do you have any intuition there?
No, I mean, but a great way to frame it, which is, you go to a company and you're looking around and that, company is building some degree of compounding value for you in the form of intellectual property and knowledge and shared experiences and all of this institutional knowledge that you're developing. And you imagine kind of compressing all of that into a proprietary system that you're now beholden to is going to be an interesting, kind of dynamic. And you can kind of, you sort of, one way that you can somewhat feel this in the economy is just so I was in with a bunch of CIOs in banking last week, and it sort of shows up in, hey, how much data can we put into these systems, and how much is the learning happening? And they're usually asking it for privacy and governance and compliance reasons, but probably over time, and in a couple of years from now, I think we'll see this, they'll start to ask about it for these deeper strategic reasons.
Yeah.
It's I'm just making this up on the fly because I haven't thought too much in that framing, but when Character.ai, I think changed their model once, and all these people were freaking out because their characters changed, right? Their relationships changed. There's going to be an enterprise version of that, which is I was just doing my work, and then all of a sudden, my entire fleet of lawyers just changed on me. And what does that mean in the economy when that starts to happen? People are that'll actually increase the friction of people buying solutions. So the nice thing is, again, back to this market idea, portability starts to happen because customers start to say, I'm not going to get locked in. I just can't get locked into your particular AI, sort of method. And but then you have a different problem, which is technically I don't know that we all know how to do that. And so we're going to be in this really interesting, unstable, kind of equilibrium for a while on that. And so what will happen is the companies that can move super quick and are okay probably taking the risk, they'll adopt the technology faster, they'll get the gains, and then we'll have this nice kind of competitive pressure in the market of those that can outrun maybe the slower, more risk-averse companies. Maybe they're being risk-averse for good reason, per what you're mentioning, but nevertheless, it still means they don't adopt. And so it'll be just lots of stuff like that for years, which is again why it's so easy to just be this is going to take 10 years. This is not happening overnight. There's 100 of these things that enterprises are going to have to all go and figure out.
Yeah, we'll have to do a check-in session. Maybe
we'll do 10 years.
We'll do a 10-year reunion for everyone who's here. The 10-year reunion on your calendar. No, Aaron, I mean, you've given us a lot to think about, and I can't think of a better person to close out this year's series about change agents.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Appreciate
for joining
it. Thanks
us.
for having me.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Awesome.